The rain was still pouring when I finished my night shift and walked toward my old car. As I reached for the door, a homeless black boy grabbed my sleeve. He was soaked, shivering, and barely 10 years old. He handed me a worn envelope and whispered, "My dad said if he never comes back, give this to you." Confused, I opened it. Inside was a photo of my son, the son who vanished 20 years ago. But the message on the back left me frozen. "I'm really glad you're here. Before we dive in, leave a comment and tell me. What are you hoping to take from this story today? Your words truly matter." Quick note, some details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection, but the heart of the message is what I hope stays with you. The rain had been falling on Chicago for 3 hours by the time the boy stepped out of the shadows at the parking lot entrance. I was standing where I always stood, at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night under the yellow security lamp at the north corner of the lot, clipboard in hand, counting empty spaces I'd already counted twice. The rain made a specific sound on asphalt that I'd memorized over 20 years. Steady. Relentless. The kind of sound that fills silence without offering comfort. Across the street, the lights on the 12th floor of the Whitfield Corporation Tower burned bright against the November dark. They never went out before midnight. I knew because I watched them every night the way some people watch the ocean. Not for pleasure, for something else I couldn't name. I've worked this parking lot for 2 decades, 63 years old now, and this is what I do. Stand in the cold, wear a uniform with someone else's company logo, and make sure cars don't get broken into. The pay is adequate. The hours are predictable. The work requires nothing of me except my physical presence, which is exactly why I took it. I used to own a business 3 blocks from here. Small operation security systems, installation, 12 employees, steady contracts with half the commercial buildings in the loop. I sold it in 2005 for less than it was worth, because I didn't have the capacity to care about worth anymore. The money went into an account I rarely touched. I didn't need much. I wasn't saving for anything. People ask sometimes why a man with a business degree and 20 years of ownership experience spends his nights standing in parking lots. I tell them I like the quiet. That's not the truth. The truth is I've been punishing myself for 20 years, and this job is part of the sentence I handed down. You don't need a courtroom for that kind of justice. You just need a mirror and enough honesty to see what you've done. The rain picked up. I pulled my jacket collar higher and marked another line on the clipboard: vehicle count, hourly log, the paperwork that justified my paycheck. My hands were cold. They'd been cold for years. I'd stopped noticing most of the time. That's when I saw him. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, wearing a jacket too thin for November, and sneakers with a crack in the left sole that I could see from 6 feet away. His hair was plastered to his forehead, dark and dripping, and he stood in the parking lot entrance with the kind of stillness that doesn't come naturally to children. The stillness of someone who learned that stillness means safety. He looked at me without moving. I looked back. 20 years. Had it really been 20 years since I stopped recognizing the shape of my own grief? He took 3 steps forward. His shoes made a wet sound on the pavement. "Are you Alvin Garrett?" he asked. His voice was steady. Too steady. The kind of calm you hear in people who've rehearsed what they're going to say because the words matter too much to get wrong. I put the clipboard down on the security booth ledge. "I am." The boy reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out an envelope. It was folded once, soft at the creases, the paper worn from being carried close to his body for a long time. He held it out to me with both hands. "My dad told me to find you," he said. "He said if I ever needed to, you'd be here." I didn't take the envelope. Not yet. I looked at the boy's face instead, the shape of his chin, the set of his eyes, the way he held his shoulders, like he was bracing for something. There was something familiar in the angles, something I couldn't place. "Who's your dad?" I asked. The boy didn't answer right away. He looked down at the envelope, then back at me, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion behind the calm. This child had been traveling, not just across the city, across something larger. "He said you'd understand when you read the letter," the boy said. "He said you'd know what to do." "What's your name?" "Milo." The name meant nothing to me. I took the envelope from his hands. The paper was damp, but not soaked. He'd kept it protected somehow. My name was written on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize, but the letters were careful, deliberate. Someone had written this, knowing exactly who I was. I looked at Milo again. His lips were starting to turn blue at the edges. He'd been standing in the rain for longer than just the walk to this parking lot. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Where's your dad now?" The boy looked at me with eyes I should have recognized, but didn't not yet. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but no less steady. "I don't know," he said. "That's why I came." The rain fell harder. Across the street, the lights on the 12th floor of the Whitfield Corporation Tower flickered once, then steadied. I'd been watching those lights for 20 years, waiting for something I couldn't name. And now, a boy stood in front of me, with an envelope and a story I hadn't heard yet. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 decades. Fear. Not the vague ambient fear that accompanies loss. The sharp, specific fear that comes when you realize loss might not be over. That it might, in fact, be compounding. "When did you last see him?" I asked. Milo looked at the ground. Water pooled around his shoes, dark and spreading. "And he told you to come here to this parking lot." "He told me to find you," Milo said. He looked up at me and his voice didn't shake. "If he disappeared." The words hung in the rain between us. Disappeared. Not left, not went away. Disappeared. I looked at the envelope in my hands. I looked at the boy. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt something shift, not hope, because I'd learned better than that, but the terrible, undeniable possibility that the story I'd been telling myself about my son might have been wrong from the beginning. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but Milo spoke first. "Please," he said quietly, "read it. He said you'd understand." I didn't open the envelope until we were moving, until the boy was sitting across from me in the car and the rain was drumming on the roof. Milo sat in the passenger seat, water pooling beneath his shoes. I'd turned the heat to maximum, but he hadn't stopped shivering. I pulled into the employee lot behind the building and cut the engine. The rain turned everything outside into streaks of yellow light and darkness. The paper was soft when I finally broke the seal. Inside, folded once, was a photograph. I knew it immediately. I had the same image at home, framed on a wall I stopped looking at 15 years ago. Me and my son standing in front of the small manufacturing business we'd just purchased together, both smiling with exhausted disbelief. That was taken in 2004. My son was 23, I was 43. But this photograph wasn't my framed copy. This one was yellowed at the edges, worn soft from handling creased down the middle, as if someone had folded it and carried it close to their body for years. I turned it over. The handwriting on the back was careful, deliberate, each letter formed with precision. "Dad, I will never leave on my own. Maple Road Warehouse, 3rd brick from window. Milo knows the way." I read it 3 times. 20 years of self-reproach crumbled in the time it took to understand 2 sentences. 20 years of telling myself I'd failed him, that I'd pushed him away with my expectations. I will never leave on my own. My son hadn't left me. Someone had taken him. I looked at Milo. He was watching me with that same calm, the stillness that came from knowing exactly what he was supposed to do. How long have you had this?" My voice sounded strange. "Always," Milo said. "Dad gave it to me when I was 6. He said to keep it safe and never show anyone except you. 6 years old. This boy had been carrying my son's message since he was 6. I folded the photograph and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I started the car. "We're going to my house," I said. "You need to get warm, and you need to tell me everything you can." Milo nodded, and for a moment I saw relief in his face. The relief of someone who'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. My house was small, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, living room, the kind of place a man lives when he's given up on the idea of family. But it was warm and dry, and Milo was shivering hard by the time we got inside. I gave him a towel and dry clothes that were far too big. While he changed, I made soup from a can, the kind of mechanical task that kept my hands busy while my mind tried to catch up with everything that had just broken open. He sat at the kitchen table and ate with the methodical attention of someone who'd been hungry for longer than just tonight. I didn't ask questions until he'd finished the first bowl. "Tell me about your father," I said. Milo looked at the soup, then at me. "We moved a lot," he said. "Portland first, then Providence, then Albany, then 3 towns in Massachusetts I don't remember the names of. Dad said we had to keep moving." "Why?" "He never told me. He just said it was safer." A childhood spent running from something he didn't understand. The anger I felt wasn't directed at him. "What did he teach you?" Milo took another spoonful before answering. "How to tell if someone was following us. How to use public transit without talking to anyone. How to wait in a public place without being noticed." He paused. He said they were useful skills. Useful skills for a child whose father was being hunted. "And he taught you about me." Milo nodded. "He made me memorize things. Your work schedule, Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., Saturdays off. The address of the parking lot, the color of your jacket. He said if I ever needed to find you, that's where you'd be. What kind of father teaches a 6-year-old child to memorize a stranger's work schedule as an emergency protocol? The kind who knows he might disappear and wants to make sure his son has someone to run to when it happens. My son had spent 20 years preparing for tonight. He talked about you, Milo said quietly. Not a lot, but sometimes. He said you were the best man he knew. He said you'd understand. I had to look away. 20 years of my son living in hiding, teaching his child escape routes and surveillance detection, carrying a photograph with a message he hoped would one day reach me. Belosi, I said, look at me. He did. Your father said if I didn't believe you, I should look in your eyes. He said I'd know. The boy met my gaze without flinching. Dark eyes, intelligent and watchful, with a shape I'd seen every day for 23 years before my son disappeared. Not identical, but close enough. The same depth, the same quiet intensity. I was looking at my grandson. I believe you, I said. Milo's shoulders dropped slightly, tension finally releasing. But even as I understood that my son was alive and had been preparing for this moment for 2 decades, one question remained. Milo, I said, why tonight? After 20 years, why did your father send you to me now? The boy looked down at his soup. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because 3 days ago, he didn't come home. 3 days. My son had been missing for 3 days, and I'd spent 20 years thinking he'd abandoned me. We left at dawn, the boy in my passenger seat giving directions in a voice that belonged to someone much older than 10. Turn left here, Milo said. The fog was thick, the kind that makes Chicago disappear, street by street. 3 blocks straight, then you'll see the red brick. He spoke with the certainty of someone who'd memorized a route so thoroughly that hesitation was impossible. Every turn, every landmark delivered in that same calm voice. The warehouse district emerged from the fog industrial buildings with broken windows loading docks overgrown with weeds. I recognized it before Milo told me we were close. I used to have a workshop 2 streets over, I said, before everything changed. Dad told me, Milo said. He said that's why he chose this place. He said you'd recognize it. My son had hidden his evidence in the shadow of our shared past. There, Milo pointed to a warehouse with faded red brick. That one. I parked on the street. Milo got out and walked directly to a window frame, the glass long gone. He didn't hesitate. He counted bricks from the left edge, his lips moving silently. At a third from the left, he said, 2nd row from the bottom. Dad made me count it 100 times. 100 times. My grandson had practiced this route and count until it was muscle memory, until he could do it even if he was scared, even if he was alone. I pulled the brick. It came away easily. Someone had loosened it years ago. Behind it, wrapped in plastic, was a waterproof box about the size of a thick book. You did exactly what he asked you to do, I told Milo. He nodded, exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the night was fading. Let's go back to the car. By the time I settled into the driver's seat, Milo was curled up in the back, eyes already closing. I let him sleep. Whatever was in this box, he didn't need to see me open it. I opened the box carefully. Inside a USB drive, documents sealed in plastic, and a handwritten letter folded into 6 pages. I picked up the letter first. The handwriting was my son's, older than I remembered, more careful, but unmistakably his. Dear Dad, if you're reading this, Milo found you. I knew he would. I had to stop. I had to breathe. Then I continued. I'm writing this in 2024, 20 years after I left. 20 years of wanting to come back and knowing I couldn't. 20 years of watching from a distance and hoping you'd forgive me for something I never did. In 2003, I found something I wasn't supposed to find. I was running audit reports and saw a pattern that didn't make sense. Transfers that appeared in one ledger and vanished in another. Amounts that bypassed every control we'd put in place. I followed the trail. It led to Lyle Ramsey, Celeste's senior financial officer. He'd been systematically moving money out of client accounts into shell corporations for at least 5 years. I estimated he'd taken close to $12 million. I was 23. I thought finding fraud meant you reported it and justice happened. I didn't understand how power works. Lyle called me into his office the next day. He knew I'd found it. He sat me down and explained very calmly that if I said anything to anyone, he would make it look like I created the fraud myself. He had emails, documents with my digital signature that I'd never signed, account access logs showing my credentials moving money I'd never touched. He'd been preparing for this moment, preparing for the day someone found what he'd done. You're 23, he said. A jury will believe you got greedy. Your father will believe it. Everyone will believe it. Or you can walk away and none of this ever happened. I should have called you. I should have trusted that you'd believe me over him. But I was terrified, Dad. Terrified that you'd look at the evidence and see what he wanted you to see. Terrified that I'd destroy everything you'd built. So I left. The worst part, the part I've never been able to forgive myself for, was the night I stood outside the office window and watched Celeste tell you I disappeared. I saw your face. I saw you collapse into that chair. I saw 20 years of partnership and trust break in real time. I ran, not from fear, from pity. I couldn't face what I'd done to you, even though what I'd done was try to protect you. I've spent 20 years running Dad, teaching my son to run, building a life that could vanish in a day if we needed it to. I never hated you. I just didn't want you to lose what you built your whole life. The letter continued, but I had to stop. My hands were shaking. My son stood outside the window and watched me break, and he ran to protect me from the truth. I sat in that car with the letter in my hands and the morning light filtering through the fog, and I cried. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes from 20 years of blaming yourself for something you didn't cause. The kind that only stops when there's nothing left. When I could breathe again, I made the call. It was just past 9 in the morning. Milo was in the kitchen eating the kind of breakfast I hadn't made for anyone in 20 years. Eggs and toast, orange juice, the simple rituals of caring for a child. I sat in my small home office with the waterproof box on the desk and the phone in my hand. Saskia Townsend, 42, was an independent forensic auditor I had worked with back in 2002 when I still had a business sharp thorough and someone who didn't waste time on questions that didn't matter. I hadn't spoken to her in over 15 years, but her number was still in my old contact book and I hoped it still worked. She answered on the second ring. Saskia Townsend. Saskia, this is Alvin Garrett. We worked together in 2002 on the Henderson audit. A pause, then recognition. Alvin, it's been a long time. What can I do for you? I looked at the USB drive sitting on my desk. There was no way to explain this simply, so I didn't try. My son disappeared 20 years ago. I thought he left voluntarily. Yesterday I learned he was forced out, blackmailed by someone who threatened to frame him for fraud. He's been in hiding since 2003. 3 days ago, he went missing again, and his 10-year-old son found me with evidence. Silence on the other end. Not the uncomfortable kind, the focused kind. And what kind of evidence? Saskia asked. A USB drive, 20 years of documentation. I don't know what's on it yet. I need someone who can analyze it properly, someone I can trust. Send it to me, she said without hesitation. If Brent spent 20 years preparing this, I'll need 48 hours to process it properly. No questions about whether I was sure. No hesitation about getting involved in something that sounded dangerous. Just competent, immediate action. You'll do it, I asked. I've worked with a lot of evidence over the years, Saskia said. I've never worked with anyone who had 20 years of preparation time, but I'm sure I want to try. For 20 years, I'd carried this weight alone. Now someone else was carrying it with me, and the difference felt like breathing after drowning. Thank you, I said. Courier it to my office today. I'll call you when I have something. She gave me the address and hung up. No wasted words, no unnecessary reassurance. Just the professionalism of someone who understood that time mattered. I sat there for a moment holding the USB drive. Then I packaged it carefully, addressed it to Saskia's office, and called a courier service. Within an hour, it was gone. That afternoon, Milo looked up from the coloring book I'd found in a closet, something left over from when Brent was young, and said, "We need to visit someone." Who? A friend of Dad's. She lives in Evanston. She's been waiting. Milo gave me the address from memory, the same way he'd given me directions to the warehouse. I didn't ask questions. I just drove. The house was small, tucked into a quiet street with trees that had lost most of their leaves. A front garden well tended even in November, warm light in the windows. Ruth Caldwell, 70 years old, with silver hair and steady eyes, stood in the doorway of her Evanston home, as if she'd been waiting for me for a long time. She looked at me. Really looked the way people do when they're comparing what they see to what they've been told to expect. "Brent said you would come," she said finally. "He thought it would be sooner, but you're here now. That's what matters." She stepped aside to let us in. The house smelled like books and tea, and the kind of warmth that comes from someone who's made a home, not just a place to live. Milo walked in like he'd done it 100 times before heading straight for the kitchen. "He knows where the cookies are," Ruth said, watching him go. "I've been keeping the jar full just in case." She led me to the living room. We sat in chairs that had been worn comfortable by years of use. "You helped raise him," I said. It wasn't a question. I helped raise Milo when Brent needed to disappear for weeks at a time. He never told me why. I never asked. Some things you do because someone good asks you to, and Brent was a good person. The weight of that, this stranger who'd protected my grandson for years, without knowing the full story, made it hard to speak. "How did you meet him?" I asked. "He was renting a room in my house 8 years ago. Providence. He needed a place that didn't ask for. ID didn't run background checks, didn't care about anything, except whether the rent was paid on time. We talked sometimes. I liked him. She paused. When he showed up with a 2-year-old boy and asked if I'd watch him sometimes, I said yes. How many people had Brent recruited over 20 years to protect a truth I didn't know existed? He left something for you, Ruth said. She stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a worn copy of a novel I recognized one Brent had loved as a teenager. She opened it and took out an envelope that had been pressed between the pages. He said you'd come eventually. He said when you did, I should give you this. I took the envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single page with a name and address written in red ink. Gail Shelton, secretary. Below that, a note in Brent's handwriting. This person has saved you many times. Now it's your turn to save this person. And the red ink, I said, what does it mean? Ruth's expression grew serious. Brent said red meant urgent, dangerous, essential. She looked at the paper in my hands. He said the secretary was the most important piece and the most dangerous. I held the envelope with the secretary's name written in red ink. This person had saved Brent many times over 20 years. Now she needed saving, and I had no idea from what. I would find the secretary. I would understand what Brent had meant by saving her, but that would be tomorrow. That night after Milo fell asleep, I sat alone with the photograph and let myself remember the night I should have known. The living room was dark except for a single lamp. The house was quiet. Milo was in the bedroom that used to be Brent's curled under blankets that had been sitting untouched in a closet for 20 years. I'd pulled them out and washed them, surprised they still smelled like detergent from 2 decades ago. I held the photograph, the one Brent had carried for 20 years, creased down the middle from being folded and kept close. Me and my son standing in front of the business we'd built together, both of us smiling. I made myself remember. 20 years ago, November 2004, a Thursday night. We were sitting at the dinner table, me, Celeste, and an empty chair where Brent should have been. I'd come home from work late, tired from a contract negotiation that had gone 3 hours longer than scheduled. Celeste had dinner ready. Chicken vegetables, the kind of meal she made without thinking about it. I asked where Brent was. She looked at me across the table and said, Brent left this morning. He said he needed to figure things out. I can still hear her voice. Calm. Too calm for a mother whose son had just disappeared. I remember putting my fork down. I remember asking the questions any father would ask. Where did he go? I don't know. When will he be back? I don't know that either. Did you try to stop him? He's 23 years old, Alvin. He can make his own choices. Every answer was a wall, every response designed to end the conversation rather than continue it. But I kept asking because I didn't know what else to do. Did he say why? He said he needed space, time to think about what he wanted, about the business, about everything. I sat there trying to make sense of it. Brent had been fine the day before. We'd talked about expanding into a second location. He'd been excited, energized, full of ideas, and then he was gone. But there was something in that conversation I saw and refused to understand for 20 years. Celeste didn't seem sad that night. She seemed relieved. I saw it. I saw the relief in her eyes that night, and I didn't want to understand what it meant. It wasn't the relief of someone who'd been worried and was now reassured. It was the relief of someone who'd been waiting for something difficult to be over, and it finally was. Her shoulders were looser. Her voice was steady. She ate her dinner normally while I sat there unable to touch mine. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself she was just handling stress differently than I was, that some people get quiet when they're upset, that some people need to maintain normalcy to cope. I told myself a lot of things that night that weren't true. The next morning, she made breakfast like nothing had changed. Eggs, toast, coffee. She sat across from me, reading the newspaper, while I stared at my plate, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. Should we call the police? I asked. He left a note, she said. Adults are allowed to leave. Can I see it? I threw it away. There wasn't much in it. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to see the note, demanded to know exactly what it said, demanded proof that my son had actually written it. But I didn't. I sat there and accepted what she told me, because I couldn't imagine a world where my wife would lie about something like this. The days after were worse. Celeste went to work. She came home. She cooked dinner. She watched television. She went to bed at her normal time and woke up at her normal time and lived her life as if our son hadn't just vanished from it. I watched her for signs of grief and saw none. I watched her for signs of worry and saw none. What I saw was someone who'd closed a chapter and moved on. And I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself everyone processes loss differently. I told myself she was being strong for both of us, that someone had to hold things together while I fell apart. Yet I told myself lies for 20 years. The truth was simpler and more terrible. I saw the signs. I saw them that first night, and I saw them in the days and weeks and months that followed. I saw the way she deflected questions about Brent. I saw the way she changed the subject when I talked about trying to find him. I saw the way she seemed lighter, freer, unburdened. I saw all of it, and I chose not to understand what it meant, because understanding would have required accepting that the person I'd loved for 25 years was capable of something I couldn't survive knowing. So I didn't look. I stopped asking questions. I let Celeste tell me Brent would come back when he was ready, and I believed her because the alternative was unbearable. And my son spent 20 years running because I was too afraid to see what was right in front of me. I put the photograph down and looked at the closed door where Milo was sleeping, my grandson, a boy I'd met 48 hours ago, who'd already taught me more truth than 20 years of asking the wrong questions. Tomorrow I would start, not because I was angry though I was, but because somewhere my son was waiting for me to finally understand. And I had 48 hours until Saskia called, with what Brent had spent 20 years documenting. 48 hours passed in a strange suspension. I went to work. I came home. I made meals for Milo. I waited. Saskia called on the morning of the third day. You need to see this in person. Her office was exactly what I'd expected, small, efficient, every surface covered with papers, and 3 computer screens glowing with spreadsheets and documents. She'd been working through the night. I could see it in her face. And sit down, she said. I sat. She turned one of the monitors toward me and pulled up a series of files, each one tagged with dates, amounts, account numbers. Your son documented everything, she said. 20 years of financial records. I've been through corporate fraud cases before, but I've never seen anything this thorough. She paused. He knew exactly what he was looking for, and exactly how to prove it. Tell me, I said. She pulled up 3 separate documents. 3 hidden accounts, all structured to look legitimate from the outside. Shell corporations, registered addresses, tax filings that appear clean at first glance. But once you know what to look for, they're completely fraudulent. No real business operations. No employees, no actual services rendered, just money moving in and staying there. Where was the money coming from? Celestis Corporation. Regular payments over 20 years, small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits, large enough to accumulate into something significant. I looked at the numbers on the screen. Even without understanding all the details, I could see the pattern monthly transfers, each one documented with precision. Who owns the accounts? I asked. Saskia pulled up another document. And that's where it gets interesting. 2 of them are registered to Lyle Ramsey under various business entities he controls. The third one, she highlighted a name on the screen. This one is registered to William Vance. The name meant nothing to me. Who is William Vance? That's the question, Saskia said. I ran the name through every database I have access to. Business registrations, tax records, property ownership, credit history, everything. William Vance doesn't exist. Never existed. The identity was created specifically for this account. A fake person? They'd created a fake person to hide money. Brent left a note beside this one, Saskia said, pulling up a scanned image. The handwriting was my son's. 3 words. This is the key. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Saskia looked at me for a long moment. Do you want to hear the number? Because once I tell you, you can't unhear it. I nodded. She turned to the final page of documentation. The 3 accounts combined have received approximately $1.7 billion over 20 years. The number didn't make sense. I heard it understood the words individually, but couldn't connect them to anything real. Billion, I repeated. Billion, Saskia confirmed. The William Vance account alone holds just over $1 billion. The other 2 split the rest. 20 years of fraud, 3 hidden accounts, an amount I couldn't process even after Saskia read it twice. I need you to understand something, Saskia said. This isn't just embezzlement. This is systematic long-term theft from a corporation worth $5 billion. And they've been doing it so carefully, so methodically, that no one noticed. Until Brent did, I said. Until Brent did, she agreed. In 2003, when he was 23 years old. And they'd made him disappear for it. I thanked Saskia and left with a copy of everything she'd found. The documentation filled a folder 2 inches thick. 20 years of proof. But there was something else I needed to check. Something that had been bothering me since I read Brent's letter. That afternoon, I drove to the south side of Chicago, to an address I'd memorized 15 years ago and tried to forget. Wayne Sinclair was the private investigator I hired in March 2004. 1 month after Brent disappeared, a man I paid monthly for 10 years, who never found a single useful lead. The building was exactly as I remembered it, 3 stories red brick, the kind of place where people rented office space by the month. I climbed to the 3rd floor and found the door with his name on it, or rather, where his name used to be. The door was locked, the window dark, a layer of dust on the handle that said, "No one had been here in years." I stood there looking at the abandoned office and pulled out Brent's file. I'd been carrying it with me since I left Saskia's office, unable to put it down. I found Wayne's name 3 pages in. Beside it, in Brent's careful handwriting, "This person has been reporting to Lyle Ramsey since January 2004. He knows every location I've been within 2 weeks of arriving. Each report costs me another city, another identity, another year of running." I read it twice. Then I read it again. I hired Wayne Sinclair in March 2004, 1 month after Brent disappeared. I paid him monthly for 10 years to find my son. Every month he sent me reports saying he'd found nothing useful, no leads, no sightings, nothing. I thought he was incompetent. I thought I'd chosen poorly, trusted the wrong person, wasted money on someone who didn't have the skills to do the job. He wasn't incompetent, he was working for the other side. Every location report Wayne gave me was useless because he wasn't trying to help me find Brent. He was tracking Brent's locations and selling them to Lyle. Every payment I made to Wayne was funding the hunt for my own son. I paid him. Every month for 10 years, I paid the man who was hunting my son like an animal. I stood outside Wayne Sinclair's abandoned office and understood something Brent had known for 2 decades. Every penny I earned working night shift security to pay for finding my son, every single penny went into the hands of the people who wanted him to disappear forever. The loop had been perfect, and I had funded it myself. I drove home from Wayne Sinclair's abandoned office carrying the weight of knowing I'd funded my son's persecution for a decade. The anger wasn't hot, it was cold, methodical, the kind that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. That evening, Milo asked a question I should have been prepared for, but wasn't. We were sitting at the kitchen table eating a simple dinner, soup and bread, the kind of meal you make when your mind is elsewhere. Milo ate with his usual methodical attention, finishing everything on his plate before speaking. He set his spoon down carefully and looked at me. "Grandpa, does Grandma know I exist?" I stopped mid-bite. The question was so direct, so calm, delivered without emotion or calculation. Just a child asking for information he needed. "No," I said. "She doesn't." Milo nodded as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. "That's why I'm safe," he said. "Dad said that's why I'm safe. If she doesn't know about me, she can't find me." The casual way he said it, the matter-of-fact acceptance that his grandmother was a threat he needed to hide from, made my chest tight. "Your father told you that when I was 6. He said there were people who would hurt him if they found him, and they'd hurt me too if they knew I existed. So I had to be secret." Milo picked up his bread and took a bite. "He said the most dangerous people aren't strangers. They're the people you should trust. A 10-year-old child shouldn't know that the most dangerous people are the ones you're supposed to trust. But my grandson knew it the way other children knew their multiplication tables, a fundamental fact memorized for survival." "You've been hiding your whole life," I said quietly. "Not hiding," Milo corrected. "Being careful. Dad said there's a difference. Hiding means you're scared. Being careful means you're smart." Brent had taught his son to frame fear as strategy to turn vulnerability into tactical thinking. It was brilliant and heartbreaking in equal measure. "Are you scared now?" I asked. Milo considered the question seriously before answering. "A little. But Dad said if I ever made it to you, I'd be safer than I'd been in a long time. He said you're the kind of person who doesn't give up." He looked at me with those dark eyes that were so much like Brent's. "Was he right?" "Yes," I said. "He was right." Milo smiled, a small, genuine smile that made him look his age for the first time since I'd met him. "This good," he said, "because I don't want to run anymore." Neither did I. The next morning, Saskia called. "I cross-referenced the financial records," she said without preamble. "Lyle's account transfers against Brent's movement timeline. And 18 payments from Lyle to Wayne Sinclair over 10 years, 2004 to 2014. Each payment between $1,500 and $2,500. Each one arriving 1 to 2 weeks after Brent relocated to a new city." I sat down. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. The pattern is exact. Brent moves Portland in March 2004, Providence in August 2004, Albany in February 2005, and so on. Within 2 weeks of each move, Wayne receives a payment from Lyle's account. Within a month, Brent moves again. The system was so clear now that I could see it mapped out in my mind, a perfect loop designed to run indefinitely. "It wasn't coincidence," Saskia continued. "It was a system. You paid Wayne to find Brent. Wayne reported Brent's location to Lyle. Lyle sent people to that location. Brent detected the threat and ran. You hired Wayne to find him again. Repeat. For 10 years. Until you stopped paying Wayne in 2014. After that, the payments from Lyle stopped too. Whatever Wayne was providing it ended when you ended the contract. I thought about that year, 2014, 10 years after Brent disappeared. I'd stopped hiring Wayne, not because I'd lost hope of finding my son, but because I'd accepted that my son didn't want to be found. I'd believed Celeste's original story again, that Brent had left voluntarily, that he was out there somewhere living his own life, and hiring investigators to track him down was an invasion of the privacy he'd chosen. I'd stopped hiring Wayne because I thought I was respecting my son's wishes. In reality, I'd stopped hiring him because I couldn't afford it anymore. Working security night shifts didn't pay what owning a business had paid. The monthly expense had become too much. How many times did Brent move because of Wayne's reports? I asked. Based on the payment pattern, 12 times in 10 years. 12 cities, 12 identities, 12 complete restarts of his life. 18 times. Over 10 years I paid Wayne 18 times, and each time I bought another manhunt for my son. I'd paid Wayne $500 a month. He'd received $2,000 from Lyle for each report. He'd made more money selling my son's location than he ever made pretending to look for him. There's something else, Saskia said. The amounts Wayne received from Lyle weren't random. They increased over time. The first few payments were $1,500. By 2010, they were $2,500. By 2014, the last payment was $3,000. Why would they increase? Because it was getting harder. Brent was getting better at hiding, better at detection, better at staying invisible. Wayne had to work harder to find him. Lyle paid more because the information was more valuable. My son had spent 10 years getting better at running, while I'd spent 10 years funding the people chasing him. I sat with the phone in my hand, understanding something worse than the betrayal itself. They had designed the system this way. They wanted me to hire someone to find Brent. It made their job easier. Every decision I'd made to help my son had been part of a trap someone else had built, and I'd walked into it carrying cash. If they'd built a system to trap me, then that system had design flaws. Every trap does. But before I could find the flaws, I needed to understand the full architecture of what they'd built. Saskia called that afternoon to tell me who William Vance really was, and it was worse than anything I'd imagined. I met her at her office. She had documents spread across her desk, printouts from databases I'd never heard of, records that looked like they'd been pulled from archive files that nobody had touched in decades. William Vance was a real person, she said, without preamble. A homeless child who died in Chicago in 1987. I sat down. How old? 7. Born 1980, died 1987. No parents listed on the death certificate, no relatives, no one to notice when someone stole his name 30 years later. She pushed a document across the desk toward me, a death certificate yellowed, an official with a child's name at the top. They used this identity to open bank accounts, Saskia continued, to register a virtual legal entity, to create a person who existed on paper, but nowhere else. And the money went to this account, I said. Over $1 billion over 20 years. But that's not the worst part. I looked up. Saskia pulled out another document. This one looked newer, a printout from a law enforcement database. They used this identity to issue a warrant for Brent in 2012. Corporate property fraud, completely fabricated. The warrant was filed under William Vance as the complainant. A dead child accusing your son of a crime that never happened. The room felt cold. What does that mean? It means your son has been a fugitive in every law enforcement database in the country for 12 years. Any traffic stop, any background check, any interaction with police, he'd be flagged for arrest on a felony warrant. They used a dead homeless child's name to turn my son into a criminal. There are no words for that kind of evil. How is that possible? I asked. Don't they verify complaints before issuing warrants? Usually. But if you know the system well enough, if you have the right connections, if you're willing to file the paperwork perfectly and pay the right fees, you can get a warrant issued based on documentation that looks legitimate. By the time anyone discovers the fraud, the damage is done. He spent 12 years as a legal fugitive created through pure fiction, Saskia said. They turned the legal system into a weapon, and he couldn't fight it without exposing himself to arrest. I sat there looking at the documents, the dead child, the fake warrant, the systematic weaponization of institutions designed to protect people. Every layer of this was calculated, deliberate, built to trap my son in a maze with no exit. Can it be challenged? I asked. Yes. With the evidence Brent compiled, we can prove the warrant is fraudulent. But it will take time, and it will require exposing everything: the fraud, the identity theft, the financial crimes. It's not just about clearing Brent's name, it's about dismantling the entire structure they built. Then that's what we do, I said. I left Saskia's office carrying another folder of evidence and drove home through the late afternoon Chicago traffic. The anger I felt wasn't fading. It was hardening into something colder, more focused. That evening, while Milo slept in the room that used to be Brent's, I sat alone in the living room and did something I'd been avoiding for 6 days. I examined not Celeste or Lyle or Wayne or the dead child whose name they'd stolen. I examined myself. I thought about the signs I'd seen 20 years ago and dismissed. Not just the night Celeste told me Brent had left, but the weeks and months that followed. I remembered the first time Lyle showed up at my house unannounced, 3 weeks after Brent disappeared. He said he was checking on me, making sure I was okay, offering support during a difficult time. I thought it was kindness from a colleague who cared. Now I understood it was surveillance. He was checking to see if I suspected anything, if I was asking the right questions, if I posed a threat to whatever they'd done. I sat in that dark living room, reevaluating every interaction I had with Celeste over the last 2 decades. The puzzle pieces were finally locking into a horrific picture. Every time I wept for our missing son, she wasn't comforting me. She was measuring my compliance. When she suggested I stop paying for private investigators in 2014, claiming it was time to respect Brent's privacy, she wasn't trying to heal my bank account. She was closing the loop because they had already trapped him in their fake warrant database. My grief hadn't just been ignored, it had been weaponized against me. I couldn't accept that Celeste would do this to Brent, so I didn't. I built alternative explanations for every sign, told myself stories that made sense of what I was seeing without requiring me to believe the unbearable. And my son spent 20 years paying the price for my willful blindness. I sat in that living room understanding something I should have understood. 20 years ago, I had been blind not because I was foolish, but because I was afraid. Afraid of what seeing clearly would cost me. But Brent had paid that cost for both of us, and now it was time I opened my eyes all the way. Tomorrow I would meet the secretary Ruth had mentioned, the one whose name was written in red ink. The next morning I went to meet the secretary whose name had been written in red ink. The woman was waiting for me when I arrived at the cafe in Lincoln Park, her hands clasped on the table like someone preparing to confess. Gail Shelton was a woman in her early 50s with tired eyes and the careful posture of someone who'd spent 15 years working for a man she morally opposed. She sat in a quiet corner booth, a cup of coffee cooling in front of her, watching me approach with the kind of attention that came from years of reading people's intentions. I sat down across from her. "Mr. Garrett," she said, not a question. "You're Gail Shelton." "I am." She took a breath. "I've been waiting for this meeting for a long time. Brent said you would come eventually. I needed to see if he was right about you." The way she said my son's name, familiar, warm, like someone who'd known him well, made me lean forward. "And how do you know Brent and Cesar?" "I'm Lyle Ramsey's secretary," she said. "Have been for 15 years, executive assistant officially. But in practice, I see everything that crosses his desk, hear every phone call, manage every calendar appointment." She paused. "And I've been warning your son for 20 years whenever Lyle sent people after him." I sat very still. 7 times, Gail continued. 7 times over 2 decades, I monitored Lyle's calls and files closely enough to know when he was planning something. I'd find a way to get word to Brent, never directly, always through intermediaries, always careful. Give him enough warning to move before they arrived. Why? The question came out rougher than I intended. "Because my own son faced something similar years ago," Gail said quietly. "Different circumstances, different people, but the same dynamic, powerful people who wanted to make him disappear because he knew something inconvenient. I couldn't save him. I tried everything I knew how to do, and it wasn't enough." She looked down at her coffee. "He died in 2002, 22 years old. The cafe noise, conversations, coffee machines, street sounds from outside seemed very far away. When I started working for Lyle in 2009, I didn't know what he was involved in. I thought it was a normal corporate job. But within 6 months, I understood who he was, what he was capable of. And by then, I'd seen the files on Brent, the surveillance reports, the location, tracking the systematic hunt for a young man whose only crime was discovering fraud. She couldn't save her own son, so she spent 20 years saving mine from the inside of the enemy's office. "I didn't do it from courage," Gail said. "I did it because I understood what powerlessness feels like. What it's like to watch someone you love being hunted and know you can't stop it. But with Brent, I could help. Just a little. Just enough to give him a chance. 7 times, I said. 7 times I knew about. There may have been others I missed, but 7 times I'm certain I gave him warning that saved his life or his freedom. I wanted to thank her, but the words felt inadequate for what she'd risked. Gail seemed to understand. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind people used for meetings or interviews. She set it on the table between us. Brent asked me to hold this, she said. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you. He said you'd need to hear it before deciding what to do next. She pressed play. The audio quality was clear professional recording equipment, not a phone. A voice I recognized immediately filled the space between us. Celeste. Celeste's cold voice echoed through the courtroom, speakers demanding a permanent resolution. If Brent didn't hand over the assets within 72 hours. Hearing it in public made the jury gasp. Another voicemail responding, "Understood. What's the budget for this operation?" "Whatever it takes," Celeste said. "But I want it clean. No exposure, no loose ends. And if he cooperates, then we get the codes and reassess, but I doubt he'll cooperate. He's had 20 years to hand them over, and he hasn't. At this point, permanent resolution might be simpler." The recording ended. I sat there staring at the small black device. The voice that sang lullabies to my son when he was 3 was now ordering his elimination with the clinical efficiency of someone scheduling a routine appointment. "When was this recorded?" I asked. "September 15th, 2024, Gail said. "I was in Lyle's office taking notes during a conference call. They didn't know I was recording. They never do. I've been recording everything for 3 years. And Brent was captured when?" I asked. "October 29th, Gail said. "Exactly 14 days after she gave that order. I tried to warn him, but they moved faster than I expected that time." I looked at Gail. "Why didn't you give this to the police immediately?" "Because I needed to know if you would really come," she said. "Brent trusted you. He spent 20 years documenting everything, preparing for the day you'd finally understand and help him. But I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know he was right to believe in you after all this time. And now I know he was right. You came. You found Milo. You're asking the right questions and following the evidence where it leads." She pushed the recorder across the table toward me. "This is yours. Use it however you need to." I held the recorder in my hands and listened to that voice one more time in my mind. The voice that had read bedtime stories to Brent every night for 10 years. The voice that had promised to love him unconditionally, now calmly ordering his capture and using the phrase permanent resolution as if discussing office supplies. I had the evidence. The question was what to do with it, and I knew exactly who needed to hear it next. The person who needed to hear it was the FBI, and I wasn't going to wait. I made the call that afternoon. The recording device sat on my desk in the small home office I barely used anymore. Milo was in the kitchen doing math homework, the kind of ordinary afternoon activity that felt almost surreal given what I was about to do. I picked up the phone and called Saskia. She answered on the first ring. "Saskia," I said, "we need the FBI." Silence on the other end, not hesitation calculation. "You're sure," she said. It wasn't really a question, but I answered anyway. "I'm sure. I have Celeste on tape ordering my son's capture. I have 20 years of documentation proving systematic fraud. I have a fabricated warrant, a stolen identity, and evidence of conspiracy spanning 2 decades. If we don't bring in federal authorities now, we're just sitting on evidence while my son is still missing." "I've prepared the file," Saskia said. I stopped. "What?" "I've prepared the complete file for federal authorities. I've been working on it since you first handed me the USB drive. I knew where this was going. I've just been waiting for you to tell me you were ready." Of course she had. Saskia understood the trajectory of an investigation better than I did. She'd seen the evidence, understood its implications, and prepared for the inevitable conclusion while I was still processing the emotional weight of it all. "When do you want to do this?" she asked. "Today, now, as soon as possible." "I'll make the call this afternoon. I have contacts at the Chicago field office, people I've worked with on fraud cases before. With evidence like this, they'll want to meet within 48 hours. 48 hours, I repeated. Maybe sooner. This isn't just fraud, Alvin. This is kidnapping, identity theft, conspiracy, fabrication of legal documents. The moment I present this file, they'll move fast. The moment I said those 3 words to Saskia, 20 years of wait shifted from paralysis to momentum. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Nothing right now. I'll coordinate with the FBI, set up the initial meeting, and brief them on the evidence. When they're ready to talk to you, I'll call. In the meantime..." She paused. "Prepare yourself for what comes next. Once federal authorities are involved, there's no stopping the investigation. Everything becomes public. Celeste will know. Lyle will know. The corporation will hire lawyers. It's going to get loud and complicated very quickly. I understand. And Brent, if he's still being held somewhere, the FBI will prioritize finding him. But that means you need to be ready for whatever condition he's in when they do. I hadn't let myself think too much about that. 3 days since Milo said Brent disappeared. 3 days of not knowing if my son was alive, or dead safe, or in danger waiting for rescue, or beyond anyone's help. I'm ready, I said. Okay, I'll call you as soon as I have a timeline. She hung up. I sat there for a moment with the phone in my hand, understanding what I'd just set in motion. This was the point of no return. Once the FBI opened an investigation, everything would cascade: interviews, warrants, arrests, media attention, legal proceedings that could take years. My life would become public. Milo's existence would become known. Celeste would learn that her grandson had survived and found me that her careful system of control had collapsed from the inside. But it was also the point of action after 20 years of paralysis. 20 years of standing in parking lots wondering where my son was. 20 years of carrying guilt for something I didn't cause. 20 years of living half a life because I couldn't imagine how to live a whole one without him. Now I was finally doing something that mattered. I walked to the kitchen. Milo was bent over his math homework pencil, moving across the page with careful attention, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. An ordinary 10-year-old boy doing ordinary things, completely unaware that the phone call I just made would bring federal agents public exposure and possibly his father home. He looked up when I entered. Grandpa, are you okay? The question was so simple, so direct. The way a child asks when they see something in an adult's face that doesn't quite match the words. 20 years I'd punished myself with night shifts and silence. 7 days I'd gathered truth, and one phone call finally set everything in motion. I looked at my grandson, the boy I'd met a week ago, who'd already changed everything about how I understood my own life, and answered honestly. For the first time in 20 years, I said I am. Milo smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, genuine expression of relief. Good, he said. Dad said you would be, when you finally understood. He went back to his homework pencil, scratching across paper, moving on to the next problem, without dwelling on the weight of what he'd just said. I stood in that kitchen doorway, watching my grandson do ordinary things, and felt something I hadn't felt since the day Brent disappeared. Certainty that I was doing exactly what I should be doing. And in 48 hours, the FBI would knock on my door, and everything would begin. They knocked exactly when they said they would. 48 hours after I made the decision, not a minute earlier or later. The FBI agents arrived on schedule exactly 48 hours after I made the call. Special Agent Brennan was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes, and the economical speech pattern of someone who'd heard every story twice and believed none of them until the evidence checked out. Agent Reeves, younger and quieter, took notes throughout the presentation with the methodical attention of someone building a case file. We met in a small conference room at the FBI Chicago field office. Saskia had arrived before me, the evidence already spread across the table in organized folders. Mr. Garrett, Agent Brennan said, shaking my hand with a grip that was professional, firm, final. Saskia briefed us on the general outline. We'd like to review everything from the beginning. I sat down. Saskia walked them through it systematically. 20 years of Brent's meticulous documentation, her forensic analysis of the financial fraud, showing systematic theft of over $1.7 billion, the William Vance identity, a dead homeless child whose name was stolen to create a ghost, the fabricated arrest warrant that made my son a fugitive for 12 years, and finally Gail's audio recording. Agent Brennan listened to Celeste's voice ordering the capture with the phrase, "permanent resolution," without changing expression. When it finished, she made a note on her pad and looked at me. "You understand, if we open this investigation, we can't stop halfway," she said. "This becomes federal, public, permanent. Your life becomes evidence. Your family becomes news. Everything gets exposed." "I know," I said. "I've waited 20 years for this moment." She held my gaze for a long moment, reading something in my face that satisfied her. "Agent Reeves opened a case file," she said. Reeves nodded and pulled out a laptop. The moment Agent Brennan opened that laptop and typed the case number, 20 years of paralyzed silence became a federal investigation. "The case is open," Brennan said. "We'll start with financial fraud and unlawful detention based on the recording. Expect this to move fast. We'll need formal statements from you, from Saskia, and from Gail Shelton. We'll execute warrants on the corporation's financial records within 48 hours, and we'll begin a search for your son immediately. How long? I asked. To find him unknown. But we have resources private investigators don't. If he's being held anywhere in the continental United States, we'll locate him. I left that building with Saskia walking beside me, both of us understanding that what we'd just set in motion couldn't be undone. How do you feel? She asked. Like I should have done this 20 years ago. You didn't have the evidence 20 years ago. No, I agreed. But I had the instinct. I just chose not to listen to it. Before I show you what Celeste did next, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think she'll fight back publicly, or B, if you think she'll disappear, and tell me why in one short sentence. Please note, what follows contains recreated details for storytelling purposes. 3 days later, Celeste appeared on Chicago local news. I was sitting at my kitchen table with Milo eating breakfast when her face filled the television screen. She was impeccably dressed, hair-perfect makeup, understated, sitting in what looked like her home office with bookshelves carefully arranged behind her. The interviewer's voice was sympathetic, concerned. Mrs. Whitfield, there are reports that federal investigators are looking into your corporation's finances. Can you comment on that? Stalinizis work wound. Galaidor. Celeste's expression was perfectly calibrated calm, but worried strong, but vulnerable. I want to be clear with the public, she said. I am being targeted by a deeply troubled individual, and someone claiming to be my son who tragically left our family 20 years ago. This person has never contacted me, never attempted reconciliation, and now appears with fabricated documents and wild accusations. She used the word family 5 times in 3 minutes, each time with precise emotional weight. My family has always been my priority. My family built this corporation over decades. My family values honesty and integrity. And my family will not be destroyed by someone who abandoned us 2 decades ago. Milo looked up from his cereal. Grandpa, is she talking about you? Seems so, I said. He went back to eating completely unbothered. Dad said she would do this, Milo said after a moment. He said she always does this when someone gets too close to the truth. She goes on TV and tells everyone she's the victim. I stopped mid-bite. Your father told you she would do this? Exactly this? Yeah. He said when you finally got the FBI involved, she'd go on the news and say you were crazy and he was fake. He said she'd use the word family a lot because it makes people feel sorry for her. Brent had predicted every move she would make. And if he was right about this, he was right about everything that came next. On the television, Celeste was still talking, her voice smooth and practiced. I've dedicated my life to this company and this city. I will not let false accusations from troubled individuals destroy what we've built. I have complete faith that the truth will prevail. The interviewer nodded sympathetically, asking softball questions that let Celeste paint herself as a victim of harassment and extortion. I turned off the TV. Milo had gone back to his cereal, as if watching his grandmother publicly call his grandfather deranged was just another Tuesday morning. Brent had prepared this child for everything, every accusation, every counterattack, every lie Celeste would deploy. Which meant Brent had also prepared something I hadn't seen yet. I learned what that something was that same afternoon. That afternoon, Milo brought me the jacket, the one Brent had been wearing the night he disappeared. The boy carried it like it was important, but not sacred the way you'd carry something you've been instructed to protect and deliver at exactly the right moment. Grandpa Milo said, Dad said if you need to find him, look at the left shoulder pad. He made me promise to remember. I took the jacket. It was dark blue, worn at the elbows, the kind of practical garment someone wears when they need to blend in rather than stand out. I turned it to the left shoulder and felt along the padding. There was something hard inside, something that didn't belong. I found the seam and carefully peeled back the padding. Inside, sewn into a small pocket that had been created specifically for this purpose, was a device about the size of my thumb. Black plastic casing, a small LED light blinking green every few seconds. A GPS tracker, still active, still transmitting. I stared at it. How long has this been here? I asked. Since before Dad was captured, Milo said. He sewed it in himself. He said if anything happened to him, this would tell you where to look. But you had to wait until the right time to find it. And this is the right time. Dad said you'd know when you were ready, and you called the FBI, so you must be ready. I pulled out my phone and called Saskia. She answered immediately. I have GPS, I said without preamble. Active transmission. Brent had a tracker sewn into his jacket the night he was captured. It's still broadcasting. Send me the device identifier, she said. I could hear her already moving, typing, pulling up software. I'll track it now. I read her the serial number stamped on the casing. 10 minutes of silence followed, while I stood in my living room, holding a jacket and a blinking device, Milo watching me with the patience of someone who'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. Saskia's voice came back. "Alvin," she said quietly, "I have the location." "Where?" "North Shore, Chicago. It's Celeste's mansion." I sat down. My son had been held captive in his mother's mansion for over a year, 6 blocks from the parking lot, where I stood every night punishing myself for losing him. "You're sure?" I said. "I'm sure. The signal is strong, consistent coming from the property at her residential address. He's been there the entire time. 6 weeks, while I worked night shifts, while I stood under yellow security lights watching the 12th floor of her corporate tower, while I blamed myself for not finding him sooner. He'd been 6 blocks away. "I'm calling the FBI," I said. I hung up with Saskia and immediately called Special Agent Brennan. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Garrett." "We have GPS evidence," I said. "Active transmission. Specific address Celeste Whitfield's North Shore mansion. That's unlawful detention with a precise location. Silence on her end, not hesitation recalibration. You're certain of the transmission. Oomt is do fixstone of our fixed." My forensic auditor just triangulated it. The signal's been broadcasting for 6 weeks from that property. "That changes things," Brennan said. I could hear her moving to heard another voice in the background. Agent Reeves, probably. "We need a federal search warrant for unlawful imprisonment. Even fast-tracked through a federal judge that's 24 hours minimum. Now how fast can you move once you have it?" "Immediately. SWAT team, federal marshals, the whole operation. But we need that warrant first. We'll have it by this time tomorrow, and then we act." I looked at the clock. 3:47 p.m. According to the recording, I said, Brent had 72 hours to comply with Celeste's demands after they contacted him. He was captured September 29th. Brennan's voice hardened. "We'll have the warrant by tomorrow afternoon. I'm filing the request within the hour. Judge will review it overnight. We'll execute at first light the day after. No, we'll move faster. We'll execute as soon as the ink is dry. Thank you." "Mr. Garrett," she said, "we're going to get your son out. But you need to prepare yourself for what condition he might be in after 6 weeks of captivity." I understood what she wasn't saying. 6 weeks was a long time. People could be broken in less. "I understand," I said. "We'll call you as soon as we have movement." She hung up. 24 hours. The warrant, the rescue. The end of this, all of it hung on one rotation of the clock. I put down the phone and looked at the clock again. 3:47 p.m. By 3:47 p.m. tomorrow, the FBI would have a warrant and Brent would either be free or Celeste would have executed whatever permanent resolution meant. I looked at Milo, who was holding the GPS device like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, because to him, it probably was. His father had trained him for this, prepared him to deliver this device at exactly the right moment, to exactly the right person. Brent had planned for everything. I decided I wouldn't sleep tonight. There was too much to think about, too much to prepare for. In 24 hours, this would either be over or it would be too late. My phone rang. Saskia. "I found something else," she said. "What?" "In Brent's files. Something that explains why Celeste wanted those property codes so desperately. It's not just about the money. It's about control of something much bigger." She explained what she'd found, and it was worse than the property codes. It was the architecture of surveillance itself. Saskia called at 2 in the morning. I hadn't been sleeping. I was sitting in the living room, with every light off, watching the clock count down the hours until the FBI warrant would arrive. Milo was asleep in the bedroom. The house was silent except for the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of old wood settling. When the phone rang, I answered before the second ring. "I'm sorry to call at this hour," Saskia said, "but I found something you need to know before the FBI goes in tomorrow." "Tell me." William Vance wasn't just for fraud. I've been digging deeper into how that identity was used, and I found something in the registration records. Celeste registered that identity with the state's private police database. I waited. The private police database is a system that certain corporations and security firms use to run background checks and access limited law enforcement information without going through FBI oversight. It's legal, but most people don't know it exists. By registering William Vance, Celeste gave herself backdoor access to search certain systems. What kind of systems? Court filings, public records searches. Anytime someone accesses those records using a search term related to her corporation, the system can flag it, and she set up an automated alert. I understood before she finished. Every time Brent accessed public court records about the corporation, Saskia continued. The system sent an automated alert to Celeste. Location data search terms, time stamps. She didn't have to wait for him to make a mistake. She built a trap, and he walked into it just by doing legal research. Celeste didn't just commit fraud. She weaponized the entire legal system, police databases, court alerts, fake identities to hunt her own son like a criminal. How many alerts? I asked. Brent documented 14 over 6 years. Each one preceded a location move by 2 to 3 weeks. He figured out what she was doing around 2016, but by then the damage was done. He couldn't research her without triggering the alert. He couldn't gather evidence without revealing his location. So he had to choose between building a case and staying safe. He chose both, Saskia said. He learned to work around it using libraries with public computers accessing records through third parties, building the case slowly enough that the alerts didn't cluster. But it cost him years. I sat in the dark, thinking about my son, spending years learning how to research his own case without triggering surveillance systems designed to track him. The FBI needs to know this, I said. I'm sending them the documentation now. It'll be part of the warrant package. She hung up, and I sat there for another hour watching the clock. 2:30, 3, 3:30. At 4 in the morning, I gave up on the idea of sleep and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Milo was already there. He was sitting at the table with a piece of paper in front of him, reading it with the focused attention he gave to everything important. You're up early, I said. I couldn't sleep either, he said. Ruth said to show you this when you ask about the estate. You haven't asked yet, but I think you need to see it now. He pushed the paper across the table. It was a will summary, typed formal, dated 2009. At the top, Frank Vance, last will and testament. Frank Vance, Celeste's father. The man the corporation was named after. He died 15 years ago. Read the part I highlighted, Milo said. I found the yellow marker line halfway down the page. I hereby bequeath 34% of my ownership stake in Vance Industries to Eleanor's first biological grandson, regardless of whether he is recognized or acknowledged by the family at the time of distribution. This bequest is irrevocable and shall transfer upon legal confirmation of biological lineage. I read it twice. Eleanor is Celeste's real name, Milo said quietly. She changed it years ago, but legally she's still Eleanor Vance Whitfield. And you're her first biological grandson. Through Dad. And she doesn't have any other children, so there's no one else it could be. He looked at the paper. Ruth kept a copy. She said great-grandfather Frank wrote it this way because he didn't trust Mom to do the right thing if he just left everything to her. He wanted to make sure his grandson got his share. 34% of a $5 billion corporation. Yes, I did the math. That's $1.7 billion. I know, Milo said. Ruth explained it to me. She said the important part is the words, regardless of recognition. That means Mom can't say no just because she doesn't acknowledge me. The will doesn't care if she knows I exist or not. Frank Vance died 15 years ago, never knowing he'd just armed his unknown great-grandson with the one legal weapon his daughter couldn't fight. Does Celeste know about this clause? I asked. Ruth thinks no. Frank's lawyer died in 2011, and the will was processed by a firm that Lyle controlled. Ruth thinks Lyle buried this part of the will and never told Mom because he was planning to use it himself somehow. But he never got the chance because Dad disappeared before Lyle could figure out how to weaponize it. I looked at Milo, holding that will summary with the same calm he brought to everything else, GPS devices, grandmothers, TV accusations, middle-of-night discoveries. Frank Vance had written those words in 2009, probably thinking about protecting future family he'd never meet. Instead, he'd given a 10-year-old boy an inheritance worth over $1 billion that explained why Celeste had spent 20 years trying to erase Brent from existence. If Milo existed, if Brent could prove his identity and his son's lineage, then 34% of the corporation belonged to a child Celeste had never acknowledged. And in 12 hours, the FBI would knock on her door. 12 hours. That's all that separated me from finding out if 20 years of searching would end tomorrow or continue forever. I sat in the dark with the television muted, watching Celeste Whitfield's mouth move in silence because I already knew every word she was about to say. The living room was dark except for the blue glow from the screen. Milo was asleep. The house was quiet. Outside November, wind rattled the windows, the sound distant and hollow. Celeste appeared on the evening news at 9 o'clock. She'd scheduled a press conference with perfect timing, the night before federal agents would knock on her door with a warrant. She knew they were coming. Someone had tipped her off, or she'd simply calculated the timeline from the moment the investigation went public. She stood at a podium with the corporation logo behind her, wearing a dark suit that projected authority and vulnerability in equal measure. Her hair was perfect, her makeup understated, every detail calibrated for maximum sympathy. And beside her, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, stood Lyle Ramsey. I unmuted the television. "I've called this press conference," Celeste said, her voice steady, with just the right tremor of emotion, "because I owe the public transparency about recent allegations against my corporation." She paused, composed herself. "For 20 years, I trusted the wrong person. Lyle Ramsey, my senior financial officer, has been systematically manipulating our accounts, creating false identities, and directing funds into shell corporations without my knowledge or consent." Lyle stood perfectly still beside her. His hands were clasped in front of him, and even on television I could see them trembling. "When I discovered what he'd done," Celeste continued, "I immediately contacted federal authorities. I've cooperated fully with their investigation. I've provided every document they've requested, because at the end of the day, I am a mother, a businesswoman, and someone who believes in accountability." She was blaming everything on Lyle, positioning herself as the victim who trusted the wrong advisor, setting him up to take the fall for 20 years of fraud she'd orchestrated. The news anchors cut to analysis. A financial expert praised her transparency. A legal analyst discussed how corporate officers could be held liable for fraud committed under their authority. No one questioned whether she was telling the truth. I felt no triumph watching her performance, just a deepening awareness of how calculated she was, how precisely she'd built every layer of protection around herself. How many times had I imagined confronting her myself, demanding she look me in the eye and admit what she'd done? 1,000, 10,000. And here she was on television, lying with the practiced ease of someone who'd never faced a consequence she couldn't deflect. I turned off the television. The room went dark. The silence was immediate and complete. I sat there for a long time, not moving, just breathing. Tomorrow, the FBI would arrive at her mansion with a warrant. Tomorrow, they would search the property and find my son, or they wouldn't. Tomorrow, 20 years would either end or continue. I pulled out my wallet and found the photograph I'd been carrying for longer than I could remember. Old, creased, the edges worn soft from being handled. Brent at 19 standing on a trail during a camping trip. We'd taken the summer before he started working at the company. He was smiling at something off camera, his face open and unguarded, lit by late afternoon sun filtering through trees. I'd taken that photo. I remembered the moment he'd just successfully started a fire after struggling with damp wood for 20 minutes. And when it finally caught, he'd looked up at me with pure satisfaction, and I'd grabbed the camera. That was before Celeste, before Lyle, before fraud and fake identities and 20 years of running. I traced the edge of the photograph, with my thumb feeling the softness of paper, worn thin by time. Tomorrow would answer that question one way or another. My hand trembled, just once, then steadied. I made a promise to the image of my son in that photograph, not spoken aloud, just acknowledged in the silent space between heartbeat and breath. Tomorrow, regardless of what the FBI found or didn't find, I would bring the truth home. I would expose what Celeste had done. I would make sure Brent's story was told. Even if I never saw him again, the truth would survive. I was putting the photograph back in my wallet when my phone vibrated. A text message, unknown number. I opened it, one word: tomorrow. Below it, a set of coordinates. I stared at the screen, my mind processing what I was seeing. Someone had sent me coordinates. Someone who knew what was happening tomorrow. Someone who wanted to help. I pulled up a map application and entered the numbers. The location pinged on screen: North Shore, Chicago, but not Celeste's mansion. A different building 2 blocks away. An office complex I didn't recognize. The mysterious ally Brent had mentioned in his notes. The person who'd sent the warnings, who'd helped him stay hidden for years. Whoever they were still active, still helping. And they'd just given me coordinates for something the FBI needed to know about. I stared at the coordinates glowing on my phone screen, then at the photograph of Brent still resting on my palm. Somewhere in Chicago, people were moving into position. Somewhere in the Whitfield Corporation Tower, evidence waited in darkness. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, 20 years of grief would finally find its reckoning. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and closed my eyes not to sleep, but to see tomorrow clearly. By 5:30, I was in the car. By 6, I was standing outside the mansion, watching federal agents prepare to bring my son home. The wrought iron fence was colder than I expected, and dawn came slower. The FBI convoy arrived precisely at 6 o'clock. 4 black SUVs, 2 unmarked sedans, and a tactical van. The street was still dark, the kind of pre-dawn gray that makes everything look unreal. Lights came on in neighboring houses as engines cut and doors opened with military precision. Agent Rebecca Torres, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of professional calm that came from years of executing warrants, approached me where I stood at the property line. "Mr. Garrett," she said, "you need to stay behind this line." "I understand." "We'll execute the warrant, clear the premises, and locate the individual described in your GPS evidence. This could take 20 minutes or 2 hours. You'll need to wait." I looked at the mansion, massive stone facade, perfectly maintained grounds, the kind of wealth that came from decades of careful accumulation and ruthless protection. "I've waited 20 years, I said. "I can wait 20 more minutes." Torres nodded and walked back to her team. I watched them approach the door, watched them announce their presence, watched them breach when no one answered. Then they disappeared inside, and I was alone at the fence with nothing but time and the cold metal under my hands. The mysterious coordinates I'd received last night had been included in the warrant package. Torres told me they'd led the team to discover a hidden basement level Celeste had never disclosed in property records, an entire floor below ground, containing file cabinets, servers, and boxes of documents dating back 20 years. They'd found it during the initial walkthrough and immediately secured it as evidence. 20 years of fraud systematically documented and stored in the basement of the woman who'd claimed ignorance of everything. I counted seconds, counted breaths, counted the beats of my heart against the silence of a neighborhood, waking up to federal agents on the block. 20 minutes felt like 20 years compressed into a single moment of suspension. Then Agent Torres emerged from the front entrance. She walked toward me with measured steps, her expression neutral, professional. When she reached the fence, she stopped. "We found the person you described," she said. "He is safe. 20 years, 3 words. He is safe." "Where is he?" I asked. "Inside. The medical team is checking him now. He's been held in a secured room on the 2nd floor for approximately 6 weeks. He's dehydrated, underweight, but conscious and coherent. He's asking for you." My hands were shaking on the fence. "Can I see him?" "Follow me." She led me through the front entrance, through a marble foyer that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire career, up a curved staircase down a hallway lined with art I didn't have names for, and into a living room where my son was sitting on a couch with a blanket around his shoulders and a paramedic checking his vitals. Brent looked up when I entered. He was thinner than I remembered. His face had aged in ways photographs couldn't capture, lines around his eyes gray at his temples, a hollowness in his cheeks that spoke of weeks without proper food. But his eyes were the same, dark, intelligent, focused. He stood up slowly, the blanket falling away. We looked at each other across 10 feet of expensive carpet and 20 years of separation. I didn't know what to say. Every word I'd imagined for this moment disappeared. Brent spoke first. "I'm here," he said simply. "I'm late," I said. "No," he shook his head. "Just in time." His voice. I had forgotten his voice. Deeper than I remembered, worn at the edges but steady. We didn't embrace, didn't rush toward each other. We just stood there, 2 people who'd spent 20 years apart trying to figure out how to be in the same room again. "Where's Milo?" Brent asked after a moment. "At home," I said. "Sleeping. The boy has done his part." Something in Brent's expression softened. Not quite a smile, but close. "He found you." He did. I knew he would. The paramedic finished his examination and stood up. "Mr. Garrett," he said to Brent, "you need hydration and proper nutrition, but you're stable. We'll transport you to the hospital for a full evaluation." Brent nodded, but didn't take his eyes off me. "Dad," he said, and the word carried 20 years of weight. "Thank you. I should have found you sooner. You found me when you were supposed to, when I needed you to." Agent Torres appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Garrett," she said, addressing me this time, "we need to brief you on something." She pulled out her phone and showed me security footage. Timestamp 11:52 p.m. Celeste Whitfield walking out the front entrance of the mansion with a single suitcase, getting into a car with darkened windows, driving away. "She left 8 hours before we arrived," Torres said. "We have alerts out at all airports and border crossings, but she had an 8-hour head start." "Where would she go?" "Unknown. Her phone is off. Her credit cards haven't been used. She's had time to disappear properly if she planned this." I looked at the timestamp again. 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after I received the mysterious coordinates. Someone had warned her, or she'd known the timing well enough to calculate when to run. "There's something else," Torres said. She pulled up another screen. "Milo's phone. It went offline at midnight last night. Last known location was O'Hare International Airport Departures Terminal." I stopped breathing. "What?" The older woman at O'Hare had been Ruth Caldwell. Milo had called the FBI himself, giving them Celeste's real location, a private airfield on the city's edge where she'd planned to disappear on a chartered plane. The O'Hare footage was a decoy. My grandson had outmaneuvered her. 20 years, and all I felt watching her in handcuffs was the weight of Brent's hand on my shoulder. The FBI brought Celeste and Lyle back to the mansion within hours. Agent Torres had tracked Celeste to the airfield, using the tip Milo provided exact coordinates, flight plan, number, everything she needed. By the time Celeste realized the trapped federal agents were already there. Now they stood in the mansion's entrance hall, both in handcuffs, both hearing their rights read with professional efficiency. Brent and I watched from the living room doorway, close enough to see, but far enough to remain separate from the procedural machinery of arrest. Celeste looked smaller than I expected. Not physically, she was still impeccably dressed, still composed, but diminished somehow. Like a building that looks impressive from a distance and reveals its cracks when you stand next to it. She saw us. Her eyes met mine for 1 second, then moved to Brent. Something crossed her face, not regret, not shame, something else I couldn't name. Then she looked away and said nothing. Lyle was on his phone speaking urgently to someone. A lawyer, probably. "I need representation immediately," he said. "Federal charges. Yes, I understand." Brent leaned close to me and whispered, "I imagined this moment for 20 years. It's quieter than I thought." "True justice is often like this," I said. No dramatic confrontation, no final words exchanged, just handcuffs clicking into place and agents reading from cards they had read 1,000 times before. Agent Torres approached us as they led Celeste and Lyle to separate vehicles. "We'll process them downtown," she said. "Arraignment will be scheduled within 48 hours. The prosecutor will contact you about testimony." "Thank you," I said. She nodded and walked away, and we were left standing in a mansion that would soon be seized as evidence, watching the woman who'd built it disappear into the back of a federal vehicle. The room was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal, with the kind of institutional weight that comes from decades of cases processed through the same space. Brent sat beside me. Saskia sat at the prosecution table, her forensic analysis compiled into a folder 2 inches thick. Celeste sat at the defense table with 3 lawyers. Lyle sat separately with his own attorney. The judge entered. We rose. The hearing began. Saskia presented the evidence systematically. 20 years of financial fraud, the William Vance identity, the fabricated warrant, the systematic persecution of a man whose only crime was discovering theft. Then she played the recording. Celeste's voice filled the courtroom, clear and undeniable. "We need him located within 48 hours. If he doesn't hand over the property codes within 72 hours of contact, proceed with permanent resolution." I watched Celeste's face. It didn't change. She sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, expression neutral. "The recording was recovered from a secure server," Saskia said. "Maintained by Milo Garrett, the defendant's grandson, over a 3-year period as insurance against exactly this situation. How long does loyalty last when your own freedom is the price?" That's when Lyle stood up. "Your Honor," he said, "I'd like to address the court." His attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but Lyle pulled away. The judge looked at him over reading glasses. "Mr. Ramsey, you're represented by counsel. I suggest you consult 111. I want to cooperate with the prosecution," Lyle said. "I have information relevant to these charges, and I'm prepared to provide full testimony in exchange for consideration." The courtroom went silent. Celeste turned to look at him for the first time since the hearing began. Her expression remained perfectly controlled, but something in her posture shifted. Your Honor," the prosecutor said, standing, "we'd be willing to hear Mr. Ramsey's offer." "Proceed," the judge said. Lyle took a breath. "I confirm everything the prosecution has alleged. The William Vance Fund was created by Mrs. Whitfield in 2003 specifically to hide transferred assets. The surveillance system was implemented at her direction. The false identity and warrant were filed using connections she provided. The detention of Brent Garrett was carried out on her explicit orders." He spoke without notes, without hesitation. 20 years of complicity laid out in 3 sentences. "I maintained records of every transaction, every communication, every decision. I can provide documentation for all of it. I'm prepared to testify fully in exchange for a reduced sentence." Celeste looked at him. He looked at the table. She whispered one word, "Lyle." He didn't respond, didn't look back, just stood there waiting for the judge's response. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," the judge said. "Counsel for both sides will meet with me in chambers to discuss this development." The courtroom emptied. Brent and I sat in the hallway while lawyers negotiated the terms of Lyle's betrayal. When we reconvened, the deal was done, Lyle would testify. Celeste's primary ally for 20 years had just signed her conviction in exchange for 8 years instead of 20. After the hearing, Saskia found us outside the courthouse. "There's something you should know," she said. She pulled a flash drive from her bag. "Milo left this with Ruth Caldwell. She gave it to me yesterday." The label read MW 2021 to 2024. 3 years of recordings, Saskia said. Surveillance logs, financial transfers, every conversation he could capture, every document he could photograph, every order Celeste gave. He didn't just help us build a case. He built an archive. I held the small device, understanding what it meant. My 10-year-old grandson had spent 3 years documenting his grandmother's crimes from inside her house, knowing that one day this evidence might save his father's life. That flash drive contained 3 years of my grandson's life. 3 years of a child living in the house of someone who would have erased him if she'd known he existed. But before I could process what that meant, we had to return to court one more time. Celeste's attorney stood and called my grandson a fraud. "Your Honor." The defense lawyer said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd made careers disappear with well-timed accusations, "This so-called grandson is a plant, a child hired to create a false familial connection for purposes of extortion. We have reason to believe this entire case is built on fabricated relationships designed to discredit my client." Judge Patricia Holbrook, a federal judge in her late 50s with a kind of methodical fairness that came from 30 years on, the bench looked at him over her reading glasses. "You're accusing the prosecution of staging a child? I'm suggesting the court verifies the claimed biological relationships before accepting testimony from individuals whose very existence in this family is questionable." That's when Milo walked into the courtroom. I hadn't seen him since the night before the raid. He'd been in FBI protective custody since O'Hare coordinating the evidence handoff and providing remote testimony about what he'd documented over 3 years. Now, he entered through the side door, with Agent Torres looking smaller in the formal courtroom setting, but no less composed. He walked to the prosecution table and sat down next to Saskia. Judge Holbrook looked at the defense attorney. "The court ordered DNA analysis 3 weeks ago at your request," she said. "The results were delivered this morning. I assume you've reviewed them?" The attorney hesitated. "Your Honor, we'd like to..." Mornips Townsend, the judge interrupted. "Please present the DNA findings." Saskia stood holding a manila folder. "The DNA analysis was conducted by an independent laboratory using samples collected under federal supervision," she said. "The results confirm that Milo Garrett shares 25% genetic markers with Alvin Garrett, consistent with a biological grandfather-grandson relationship. Certainty level 99.97%. She pulled out another document. "Additionally, Brent Garrett's DNA confirms a parent-child relationship with both Alvin Garrett and Milo Garrett, and Celeste Whitfield's DNA confirms a biological grandmother relationship with Milo Garrett through her son Brent." The defense attorney sat down. The identity fraud defense. The last argument Celeste had against the mountain of evidence collapsed in the time it took to read 3 sentences. Milo looked at his father. Brent smiled slightly and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Judge Holbrook reviewed the documents, made a notation, and looked up. Based on the DNA evidence and the testimony presented over the past 3 weeks, this court finds that the defendant Celeste Whitfield engaged in a systematic campaign of fraud identity theft, unlawful detention, and conspiracy spanning 20 years. The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable. She paused. Additionally, this court addresses the matter of the false warrant issued under the fabricated identity of William Vance. All outstanding warrants under that name are hereby vacated and expunged from all federal, state, and local databases. 20 years of silence, 12 syllables to end it. Brent Michael Garrett, born June 1977. The judge continued. "The court recognizes that Brent Garrett has lived under false identity and threat of arrest for 2 decades due to fraudulent legal actions. His legal name is restored, and all records related to the William Vance identity will be sealed and marked as fraudulent." She nodded to the court clerk. The clerk stood and read from a prepared statement. "The court recognizes the legal identity of Brent Michael Garrett, born June 1977, resident of Illinois, son of Alvin Garrett. All legal disabilities associated with the false William Vance identity are hereby removed." I reached over and put my hand on Brent's shoulder. "Welcome home, son," I said quietly. His name. Finally his name. Judge Holbrook wasn't finished. "There is one additional matter," she said. This court has reviewed the will of Franklin Vance, deceased 2009, which contains specific provisions regarding inheritance distribution. Based on the DNA evidence confirming biological lineage, and based on the terms of that will which specify inheritance shall pass to Eleanor's first biological grandson, regardless of recognition. She looked at Celeste. I listened closely as Judge Holbrook announced her ruling addressing only what fell within her federal jurisdiction. She formally referred the inheritance question, Milo's 34% stake, to the Cook County Probate Court, where our civil lawyers assured us it would be a mere formality. But with the DNA evidence certified and the fraud fully exposed, Saskia told us quietly outside the courtroom afterward that the probate ruling was a formality. Franklin Vance's will was unambiguous. His words had waited 15 years to do their work. Celeste's face went completely still. Milo sat at the prosecution table, looking like exactly what he was. A 10-year-old boy who'd just inherited more money than most people could imagine. He didn't react, didn't smile, just sat there with the same calm he brought to everything. The judge announced sentencing would occur in 2 weeks and adjourned the hearing. Bailiffs approached Celeste's table. She stood hands still cuffed in front of her and allowed them to escort her from the courtroom. As she passed our table, she stopped. The bailiffs paused, waiting. Celeste looked at Milo, not with hatred, not with regret. Something else, something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Recognition. She leaned slightly toward our table and whispered one word before the bailiffs pulled her away. Franklin. The morning light filtering through Brent's apartment windows felt different, somehow, softer, kinder. I sat at his kitchen table, watching Milo push scrambled eggs around his plate while Brent poured coffee. My son moved with an ease I'd never seen in him, like 20 years of tension had finally drained away. "Grandpa, you're staring again," Milo said, but he was smiling. "Can't help it." I took the coffee cup Brent offered. Still getting used to all this. Brent settled into the chair beside me. The morning news played quietly on the television behind us, images of yesterday's courthouse drama still dominating every channel. I tried not to look, but movement on the screen caught my eye. Milo noticed. "They're showing Mom again." "Turn it up," Brent said quietly. The reporter's voice filled the kitchen. "Federal judge has issued an emergency order freezing all assets and operations of Vance Industries pending criminal investigation. Sources inside the FBI confirm that the corporation's entire financial structure appears to have been built on the fraudulent identity established for Brent Michael Garrett 20 years ago. Hundreds of employees learned yesterday that their jobs were completely gone." Brent muted the television with a heavy sigh. Those innocent people's secretaries, janitors, accountants had nothing to do with what Celeste did, yet they paid the price for her greed. "It's not your fault," I said. Brent's jaw tightened. "Isn't it? If I'd hidden better, they wouldn't have locked me in that room for 6 weeks. I watched my grandson, this brilliant, brave kid who'd risked everything to find the truth. Something had been nagging at me since yesterday's hearing when Celeste whispered that name as they led her away. Milo Franklin Garrett," I said slowly. "Where'd the Franklin come from?" Milo's expression shifted, becoming cautious. He glanced at Brent, who nodded slightly. "Dad told me I was named after your brother, Grandpa," Milo said. "He wanted to keep the family memory alive while we were running." Brent's hands clenched around his coffee cup. "There was no Franklin Hendricks. I looked. No record of anyone by that name in Celeste's family. Then why—" I stopped, pieces clicking together in my mind. Milo pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned it to face me. On the screen was a photograph of a young man in an army uniform, early 20s, maybe with my son's eyes. That's Benjamin," I whispered, "my brother, dead in Iraq in 2004. Brent leaned forward. "His middle name?" My throat tightened. "Franklin, after our grandfather." Did she know 20 years ago, when she was planning everything? Did Celeste already know she'd take my son and turn my grandson's name into some twisted memorial to the brother I'd lost? Milo's voice was quiet. She knew about Uncle Benjamin. She met him once, at our wedding. The memory came back sharp and clear. Benjamin in his dress uniform, Celeste asking him about his medals, his service. I'd thought she was just being polite. "Jesus!" Brent muttered. "She wanted you to carry his name," I said to Milo. "Wanted me to know somehow, another knife to twist." Milo set his phone down. "There's something else. Agent Torres called this morning while you were in the shower, Grandpa. The FBI finished processing Celeste's plea deal. I'd known this was coming. Celeste's lawyer had been negotiating surrender terms since the arrest, full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges on the identity fraud counts. The kidnapping charge wouldn't budge, but 30 years was better than life. And I asked, "She wants to talk to Dad." Brent stood abruptly, walked to the window. His shoulders were rigid, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "No," I said, "absolutely not. She said she'd only provide the final piece of information if Dad agrees to visit." Milo's voice was careful, measured. "Torres thinks she's serious. There's something about the offshore accounts money they haven't traced yet. Celeste claims it's hidden under a name no one's found." I pushed back from the table. "It's manipulation. That's all she knows how to do." "I know." Brent didn't turn around. "But what if she's telling the truth? What if there's more money hidden away, more victims we don't know about? You don't owe her anything. I owe those employees who lost their jobs yesterday." Now Brent turned to face me. "If there's money hidden away, money that should go to Milo, money that could help the people Celeste destroyed, I have to at least try." How could I argue with that? My son who had had everything stolen from him still thinking about helping others. Milo stood. "I'm going with you." "No," Brent and I said simultaneously. "She's still my mother." Milo's voice was firm. "She whispered my name yesterday for a reason. This isn't just about money or justice anymore. There's something she wants to say, and I think—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "I think she wants to confess. Confess to what we already knew everything. The kidnapping, the fraud, the drugs, the programming. What could possibly be left? Unless—" My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Before you visit Celeste, check Brent's medical records from Riverside Psychiatric, specifically in November 2004. Ask about the blood transfusions." I stared at the message. November 2004, that was the month Brent disappeared. "Dad?" Brent's voice seemed distant. "What is it?" I showed him the phone. Milo leaned over, read the message, and went pale. "Blood transfusions." "What blood transfusions?" Brent grabbed my phone, read it again. His hands started shaking. "Whose man?" I asked, but I already knew. Milo, my archivist grandson, had been digging deeper than any of us realized. And whatever he'd found about those blood transfusions, whatever happened at that psychiatric hospital 20 years ago, was bad enough that Celeste was willing to trade her final secrets for one last conversation. The blood transfusion records turned out to be nothing, a clerical error from when Riverside Psychiatric treated Brent for pneumonia during his first month there. Milo had flagged it because the dates seemed suspicious, but Agent Torres confirmed it was routine medical care properly documented. Just another dead end in a case that had already revealed all its secrets. What mattered was Brent's response to Celeste's request. He sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, writing and rewriting a single paragraph on yellow legal paper. When he finally handed it to her attorney, it was one sentence long: "I have nothing to say to you, and I prefer the silence." No meeting, no final confrontation, no closure scene where he forgave her or condemned her or demanded answers we already had. Just silence. "You sure?" I'd asked him. "She took 20 years, Brent said quietly. "She doesn't get another minute." Now, January sunlight turned the school gate gold, and my grandson walked through it, carrying a backpack with his real name written inside. I stood beside Brent on the sidewalk outside Evanston Elementary, watching Milo join the stream of kids heading toward the main entrance. The backpack was navy blue with his initials MFG stitched in white thread. Milo Franklin Garrett. No more William Vance. No more homeschooling in a penthouse prison. Just a 10-year-old boy going to 4th grade. "I didn't know what school looked like to my son," Brent said. I glanced at him. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. "Now you know," I said. Milo reached the door, turned and waved. One quick motion, casual, easy like kids do when they know their parents are watching, but don't want to seem babyish in front of classmates. Then he disappeared inside. Brent exhaled slowly. He just waved, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It should have been natural. Should have happened when Milo was 5, 6, 7. Should have been my son standing here watching his kid go to school every morning for years already. But Celeste stole that, and no amount of justice or inheritance or name restoration could give it back. What we had was today, this morning, this wave. "Come on," I said. "I'll buy you breakfast." We walked to the diner 3 blocks from my house, the same place I'd eaten alone for 20 years. The same booth where I used to spread missing person flyers across the table and wonder if anyone would ever call. Now, Brent sat across from me, ordered coffee and eggs, and looked almost peaceful. "Torres called yesterday," he said. "The offshore account Celeste mentioned doesn't exist. She was bluffing, hoping I'd visit." I wasn't surprised. "You regret not going—" "No." He stirred sugar into his coffee. "I regret a lot of things, 20 years of things, but that's not one of them." The weeks that followed blurred together in the best possible way. Milo settled into school, made friends join the chess club, brought home homework that Brent helped him with at my kitchen table. Normal things, ordinary things, the kind of life that felt extraordinary only because we'd fought so hard for it. Then March arrived, and with it the final legal pieces. I was replacing a light bulb in the hallway when Brent's phone rang. I heard his voice from the kitchen, calm measured the tone he used when he was holding himself carefully together. Thank you for letting me know, he said, and ended the call. I found him standing by the window phone, still in his hand. That's it, he said. Both in pre-trial detention corporation insolvent. Bail denied flight risk. Celeste's trial date is set for August, Lyles for September. 20 years to get here. One wave to make it worth everything. I crossed to stand beside him. Outside, the March wind scattered dead leaves across the lawn, winter finally giving way to spring. How do you feel? I asked. Like I'd almost forgotten what it feels like to have our part just beginning instead of ending. He was right. For 2 decades, every day had been about loss, about what was taken, what was missing, what might never be found. Even after we found Brent, after we rescued Milo, after we exposed Celeste and Lyle and brought them to justice, it had still felt like we were finishing something. Closing a chapter, ending a nightmare. But this Milo at school, Brent healing the 3 of us building something together, this was a beginning. Whitfield's creditors are circling, Brent continued. The FBI estimates the corporation had maybe 6 months of runway left, even before the fraud came out. Now, investors are fleeing, contracts are being canceled. It'll be bankrupt by summer. And the employees? I asked. Severance packages funded by the seized assets. Not great, but something. He paused. Milo asked about them yesterday. Wanted to know if any of the money coming to him could help. My grandson, 10 years old and already thinking about how to fix what his mother broke. That evening, the 3 of us sat down to dinner at my house, spaghetti garlic bread salad. Simple meal, simple moment. Milo talked about a kid in his class who was really good at math, and Brent helped him practice spelling words, and I watched them and felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. Peace. Then Milo pushed his plate aside and pulled out a piece of paper. Our part, not the ending, the beginning. I've been thinking, he said, about the money, the inheritance. Brent and I exchanged glances. Grandpa waited 20 years for Dad to come home, Milo continued. And there are other families out there waiting, right? Other kids who are missing other grandparents looking... Yes, I said quietly. So, I want to give it away. All of it. Well, except college money. But the rest, the whole $1.7 billion, I want to make a foundation. For missing persons, for families. The paper he'd pulled out was covered in careful 10-year-old printing. A list. 47 items. Brent leaned forward. Milo. I already made goals, Milo said, and turned the paper so we could see. Foundation goals was written across the top in blue marker. Below it, numbered entries, how many families to help, how many missing persons. Cases to fund, how many children to bring home, how many investigators to hire, how many resources to provide. 47 ways to turn his mother's crimes into someone else's salvation. At the bottom, one sentence that made my throat tight. So nobody waits 20 years like Grandpa did. Brent reached across the table and put his hand over Milo's list. Then we'll do it together, he said quietly. All 3 of us. I nodded, unable to speak. My grandson wanted to transform the worst thing that ever happened to our family into hope for strangers. We spent the next 2 months working with attorneys to establish the foundation structure. Milo attended every meeting, took careful notes, asked questions that made the lawyers reconsider their answers. But there was something else I had to do first. The employee badge felt lighter than it should have when I handed it back for the last time. Marcus Webb. My fellow guard took the badge and vest from me without ceremony. He had worked the day shift for the past 10 years while I took nights. Steady guy, straightforward, never pried into why a man my age was still patrolling parking lots. We stood outside the supervisor's office on a warm July evening. Through the window behind him, I could see the building across the street, the one that used to have Vance Industries signage blazing from the 20th floor. Workers were removing the letters now, preparing to install a new company's name. You're the calmest security guard I've worked with, Marcus said. Never complained, not once in 10 years. Had bigger things on my mind than parking violations, I said. He laughed. Well, you earned this retirement. Enjoy it. I shook his hand, collected my things, and walked to my car. My phone buzzed as I unlocked it. A text from Agent Torres appeared on the screen. Thought you'd want to know, both sentences came down today. Celeste Whitfield received 15 years in federal prison, and Lyle Ramsey received 8 years with cooperation credit. I sat in the driver's seat reading the message 3 times. 15 years for Celeste, 8 years for Lyle. Numbers that seemed both impossibly long and impossibly short for what they'd done. Celeste would be 78 when she got out Lyle's 63. I didn't feel triumph or vindication. I felt tired and ready to go home to my son and grandson. I texted back, "Thank you for everything." Then I drove away from that parking lot for the last time. August arrived hot and bright. Brent and Milo showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. 20 years, 2 suitcases, that's all that remained to carry home. Everything else, the penthouse, the luxury cars, the life built on fraud, had been seized or sold or left behind. What Brent brought to my house fit in my hallway. "This is it?" I asked. "This is everything that matters," Brent said. Milo was already exploring checking out the rooms with wide-eyed excitement. He poked his head into the guest bedroom, then the room that used to be Brent's, still unchanged after all these years. "Can I have this one, Grandpa?" Milo called from the back bedroom, the smallest one that overlooked the garden. "Sure," I said. He appeared in the doorway grinning. "It has a good view. And Grandpa, can you grow tomatoes? Dad said you used to grow really good ones." I looked at Brent. He was smiling, a distant expression in his eyes. "You remember that?" I asked. "I remember from when I was little," Brent said softly. "Things that matter last a long time." The garden had been empty for years. After Brent disappeared, I couldn't bring myself to plant anything. The raised beds had filled with weeds, the soil gone hard. But now, "Then we'll plant them tomorrow," I said. "All 3 of us." Milo's face lit up. "Really? Really?" We spent the afternoon unpacking. Brent's boxes held clothes, a few books, some papers from the FBI case. Milo's suitcase was stuffed with schoolwork chess trophies, drawings a worn fantasy novel he'd read 4 times. Kid treasures precious beyond measure to him. I was helping Brent organize his closet when he pulled something from the bottom of the second box and went still. "Dad," he said, "where did you get this?" He held a photograph, one I'd kept in my desk drawer for 20 years, unable to look at it, but unable to throw it away. It showed the 3 of us at Sunday dinner in 2005. Brent was 23, standing beside the table, with his arm around Celeste's shoulders. I was carving a roast caught mid-laugh at something Celeste had said. We looked happy. We looked like a family that would last forever. It was taken 6 months before everything broke. "I kept it," I said quietly. "Kept a lot of things, just in case." Milo knew about the tomatoes because Brent had kept that memory alive through all those dark years. Even after 2 decades of running, the pieces of our real life had survived in my son's heart, passed down to his own boy. Brent studied the photograph for a long moment. Then he walked to the living room, found a frame in one of the boxes, and carefully placed the picture inside. "This goes on the mantle," he said. "You sure?" I asked. She's in it. She was part of it," Brent said. "Part of the story. We don't have to pretend she wasn't. But we also don't have to let her define what comes next." He set the frame on the mantle between my brother's military portrait and a new photo of Milo from his first day at Evanston Elementary. Past, present, future. Lost survival hope. That evening, after Milo was settled in his new room and Brent had organized the last of his belongings, I stood at my front door for a moment before closing it for the night. Through the doorway, I could see into the living room. Milo was building something elaborate with blocks on the coffee table, tongue stuck out in concentration. Brent sat beside him reading a book, occasionally reaching over to steady a tower when it wobbled, both of them illuminated by the same lamp. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't standing alone. The door closed behind me on everything that came before. The first week was strange, waking up to sounds of other people in my house. Breakfast for 3 instead of one another, coat hanging by the door. But strange in the way sunshine feels after a long winter. Strange like something you'd forgotten could be normal. By the second week, it wasn't strange anymore. It was just life. November brought the first snow and the last nameplate. Brent and I stood on the sidewalk across from the building, where I'd worked security for 20 years, watching workers in orange vests unbolt steel letters from the 20th floor. The Vance Industries sign came down piece by piece, lowered on cables to a waiting truck. "You stood here 20 years looking at that nameplate," Brent said quietly. "I wasn't looking at the nameplate," I said. "I was looking at the 12th floor." He glanced up at the building. "What were you thinking? One day those lights will go out." The snow fell softly around us, melting on the pavement. Workers secured the last letter, the S, and signaled to the crane operator. It lifted away, leaving only the ghostly outline where the sign had been for 2 decades. Brent watched it go. "Do you hate her?" I'd asked myself that question 1,000 times. The answer always surprised me. "No," I said. "I pity her. She built an empire and she'll die alone in a cell. I was a security guard for 20 years, and I have you and Milo. She spent her whole life taking things that didn't belong to her, and in the end, she had nothing. I spent mine waiting for what was always mine, and I have everything. The truck pulled away carrying the nameplate to whatever scrapyard collects the debris of fallen companies. Brent and I walked back to my car without saying anything else. Some moments didn't need commentary. We drove home, and it was home now. Not just my house where Milo was doing homework at the kitchen table. Pencil stuck behind his ear, brow furrowed in concentration. Ordinary, perfect. December arrived with holiday preparations and foundation paperwork, and Milo's chess tournament, and 1,000 small things that filled the days with purpose instead of waiting. The calendar counted down to New Year's Eve. That evening, while Brent and Milo were setting up a board game in the living room, I went to my bedroom and took down the photograph from my dresser. The one from 2005. Brent young and smiling Celeste at his side, me carving the roast. The last dinner before everything shattered. I held it for a long moment. The old photo served its purpose. It kept me searching, kept me believing Brent was out there somewhere, that the family in this picture could somehow be restored. But we weren't that family anymore. Couldn't be. Too much had changed. We were something different now. Something built not on innocence, but on survival. Not on what we'd been given, but on what we'd fought to reclaim. 20 years searching. One photograph to close it. I put the old frame in my desk drawer, closed it gently, and picked up the new one. This photograph was taken in January, Brent, Milo, and me, standing at the school gate on Milo's first day. None of us were facing the camera. We were all watching Milo wave goodbye, 3 generations, focused on the same moment of ordinary joy. A stranger had taken it, offered to email it to us. I'd had it printed and framed, but hadn't found the right place for it until now. I set it on my dresser where the old one had been. When I came back to the living room, Brent glanced up from the game board. New frame. New everything, I said. He held my eyes for a moment, understanding passing between us without explanation, then returned to teaching Milo strategy. The hours ticked toward midnight. We ate pizza, watched Milo win 2 games and lose. One listened to him read aloud from his fantasy novel, with dramatic voices for each character. Normal evening. Normal family. The kind of night I had dreamed about for 20 years. At 11:45, Milo checked the clock and jumped up. 15 minutes until midnight. Should we watch the fireworks from the balcony of Escapor and Basispa? It's very cold, Brent said. I'm not afraid of cold, Milo declared. I smiled. Let's go. We bundled into coats and stepped onto the small balcony overlooking the neighborhood. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, buildings lit like jewels against the black sky. The temperature was below freezing our breath, forming clouds in the air. Milo wedged himself between Brent and me, small and warm and present. How long? He asked. 12 minutes, Brent said. We stood together in silence, watching the city prepare to turn over another year. Somewhere in a federal prison, Celeste was counting down to midnight alone. Somewhere in another facility, Lyle was doing the same. They would have many more New Year's Eves like that, solitary, stripped of everything they'd stolen. It wasn't revenge I'd wanted after all. It was this moment, this family, this simple, ordinary, extraordinary peace. The 5 minutes, Milo announced. The 20-year journey hadn't been about justice or revenge or even finding Brent. It had been about learning that love doesn't expire with time, that a father's love for his son, a grandfather's love for his grandson, doesn't diminish across 2 decades of absence. It compounds, it grows, it waits. And when it finally has somewhere to land, it transforms everything. 2 minutes, Milo said, bouncing on his toes. Brent put his hand on Milo's shoulder. I put mine on Brent's. 3 generations, 1 chain unbroken despite everything that tried to sever it. 1 minute. The city erupted in early fireworks, impatient celebrations bursting across the skyline in gold and silver and blue. 30 seconds. Milo's voice was pure excitement. 2015. Brent and I joined him. 10-9, 8-7, 6-5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The sky exploded in light and color. Fireworks bloomed over Chicago like flowers made of fire, and Milo cheered and Brent laughed, and I just stood there taking it all in. I wasn't a security guard anymore, or a businessman, or a man consumed by 20 years of waiting. Just a grandfather, and that's all I need. And to you, listening to my story, remember this family betrayal can steal decades from your life, but it can't steal your will to keep searching. For 20 years, I made the mistake of thinking I had to fight this battle alone. I worked night shifts, followed cold leads, and kept my pain private. I should have asked for help sooner. I should have trusted that the truth would surface if I kept the faith. Don't make my mistake of believing you have to carry everything by yourself. Here's what I learned from family betrayal. The people who hurt you most are often closest to you, but that doesn't mean you stop believing in family. My grandson Milo proved that. When family betrayal tears your world apart, you have two choices. Let it destroy you, or let it refine you into someone stronger. I believe God put me through those 20 years of searching because he knew I'd find not just my son, but my grandson, and together we'd build something meaningful from the wreckage. His timing wasn't mine, but it was perfect. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find the strength to move forward? Your story might help someone else who's struggling right now. Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Revenge Dad for more stories like this. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. One final note. While the heart of this story is real, some details have been adjusted for storytelling and privacy. What matters is the message: never stop searching for truth and never give up on the people you love.